Christine Bach, and I'm the president of the Smithville Historical Society, for those of you who don't know me. And gosh, we're just thrilled to have such a wonderful crowd here tonight. I know a lot of you are Auwarters, and we're glad to see you, and we're glad to see everyone. Thanks for turning out. We're looking forward to the program, but by our bylaws, we have one piece of work that we have to do first, and that's the election of officers for next year. So we're going to take care of that in a hurry, and then we'll move on to the program. Diane Merrill, I believe, has the nominating committee report. Music karaoke.
Hi. For our election for 2015, we have President Christine Buck, Vice President Allison Owens. The secretarial position is still open, but I will be the backup in the meantime. Our corresponding secretary is Pat Heisler and Treasurer Joan Barker. For the Board of Trustees, we have Fred Heisler Sr., Howard Barker, Doug Garner, Beverly Eaton, and John Buck. Collection Management, Joan Barker, Adele Thompson, Pat Heisler, Diane Merrill, and Sharon Davis. For our nominating committee, we have Pat Heisler, Diane Merrill, Marie Kale, and Ellen Adams.
Thank you. Are there any nominations from the floor or volunteers? Would anyone like to be secretary next year? Oh, no hands. If there are no nominations from the floor, I would like to ask Diane to move the slate.
I move so moved.
Thank you. And is there a second?
Second.
All right, so we have a second. And in order to vote, you need to be a member, so sit quietly if you're not. And all those in favor of the slate, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, if any? Motion's carried. Thank you very much. And on the strike of 7 on that clock, we're going to move on to the program. Our program tonight, you all know, is about Hansman's Mills, and we're calling it a trip back in time. Whoops. Just need a quick second. I'll just talk until we do it. We do have some thank yous before we start the slideshow. The Auwarter family has been very supportive in sharing everything with us. Vicki House is doing some taping for us. Sharon Davis coordinated the program. Peg Ross let us borrow this wonderful large screen, and when our projector went belly up, she let us borrow her projector, so thank you, Peg. And people who set up, people who baked, we're very grateful for everything you've done. We have refreshments for afterward, don't forget that. In the back, we have our new calendar for 2015 you might take a look at, and if you care to buy one, while they're for sale. We're going to move through the program. I know you're all here to hear John and Brian talk, but we decided we sort of split the duty. I'm going to start by talking about the Hansmanns and how it is they ended up in Smithville when they were Germans from New York City. And then John will take over when we get to the mill. And Brian, I'm going to call on you for a technical slide. Many people remember the beautiful Hansman's Mill on the Jenny, and we have a photo from late 40s or early 50s. We could judge it by the vehicles, and people didn't have new vehicles then, so it's a little bit hard. But here's the old, whoops, I forgot my plant. The old bridge in Smithville. There's the mill with a nice sign on it, Hansman's Mills, and we know it's a newer photo because for a long time it said Jenny Ganslet Roller Mills. And I don't know exactly when it changed. Do you, John?
Yeah, the early 50s we put a new sign up.
Okay.
Chris, would you like that set of lights off?
Thank you. Yeah, that's good. Thanks. Yep, that's good. Thank you. Also notice the dam, what a nice looking dam, and the water that comes down is the Jenny Ganslet from McDonough. And just above Smithville, it picks up water from Round Pond, Long Pond, and Cincinnatus Lake. So a lot of water moves through Smithville. Hansmann's Mill was not the first mill on the site, but it's a very early site. 1809, a mill was built on that west bank. It was called Powell's Mill, and it was just a year after Smithville was formed, so it was a very early mill. There were also mills on the east bank, or the far side away from Smithville Flats, and most of those mills were sawing, planing, and carding mills. So that was not the feed mill side of the creek. Hansman's side was where the feed was. The next photo we have is an early mill. It was lost in the flood of 1890, so we know the photo is 1890 or before. But the house that's there is still standing. I think, did you tell me, John, the Barnes used to live there?
Yeah, Elmer Barnes lived there.
And Ingram's, did somebody tell me?
Henry Ingram, yes.
And then this is an old mill. It's not part of the mill as we know it today. It's gone. And way in the back there, you'll notice Whitehall. And the beautiful water coming over the dam. Frederick Hansmann was a German. He arrived in New York City at the age of 14 by himself. He earned his trip over by serving as a cabin boy, and I think John said he had to make 2 trips to pay for coming and staying. He got a job in New York City in a grocery store. He saved his money and brought another brother over, and then the 2 of them worked and brought a 3rd brother over. So there they were in New York City. This is from the collection of the Hansmann, so we know it was taken at the time, and John told me that this is construction of a subway terminal. And I looked online today, the first subway that operated underground was 1904, so we know this photo was before, well, around 1900s, early 1900s. He was married, I got new information today, I think he was married in 1898 to Maida Rorson, and they bought a small hotel in New York City. And the first one that I know of was called the Clyde Hotel, and it was in Manhattan, near the Brooklyn Bridge. And they rented rooms by the day of the week. They had a lunchroom, and they sold alcohol. And John told me that his grandmother worked very hard at that hotel. She cleaned all the rooms and changed all the sheets and did all the cooking for the people who came. So she was a partner in the business. And later they bought, we believe, the Gramercy Hotel. And you'll see his name right there, F.H. Hansmann. And I have the text here, but these are sort of ads for liquors. Fine ales and porter. Valentine's, who can read that? Export beer.
That's where my mother was born, too,
In that hotel?
Yeah.
If you didn't hear John, he said his mother was born in that hotel. Close up, notice a man is getting his shoe shined. He's sitting up in a chair, and there's the shoe shiner. F.H. Hansmann. There he is out front, and I want to point out these 2 dogs. Almost every photo we have of him, he has dogs. He must have loved his dogs. Did he, John?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. He came to Smithville, and one would wonder why. He was a New York City person, but he came to the area by train with friends to go grouse hunting or partridge hunting. This was an area at the time that had been settled by people with New England backgrounds and a large group of Scots-Irish people in Smithville. So he stood out as a German. He liked the area, and he bought the Brick House Farm on Route 220. And a lot of people know that as the Erta farm. That's what I call it, and I didn't even know the Ertas. So the family moved here, including their daughter, Meta, who is John's mother, sometime around 1905. We're not exactly sure of the year. And just to put it in perspective, in Smithville, most people know of Tarbell Farms, and Gage Tarbell started his big expansion of the farms in 1902. So that was about the same time that the Hansmans came. This is the Brick House Farm. You'll see that lovely horse and sleigh. There's little Meta standing out front. The house is back here. It's a very poor photo. It is not the same brick house that's there now. It was an older house that had been there for several generations. And right after the Hansmans left, it burned down. So the house that's there was rebuilt sometime after 1911, the Erta house. He hadn't been a farmer, and here he is moving to Smithville to be a farmer. But John told me his mother said that he taught himself by reading books and journals and learned how to farm and really was successful at it. And he was very enthusiastic, and you'll see some photos that show that. First one is building a barn on the farm. There's a horse and some wagons here, and we're looking north. We're looking toward McDonough in this picture. We looked at the people. There are people over here working. There are people over here working. There are people on the second floor. There are people on the third floor. And I think John counted about 30 people working on that barn, all by hand. Here's the finished barn, and the view here is from uphill, looking down toward the road. Notice the dogs. Hansmans had their dogs, and I don't know if John can help me with who is who, but the Hansmans are in here, Fred and Meta, and it looks like some relatives. There's a little girl back here. There are more people back here.
That was my Aunt Frida.
Which one? The little girl?
Yeah.
You'll notice a tractor, a fella sitting on the tractor, an early day for tractors, and it was a steam-operated tractor. You can see the water reservoir in the back. And here is some harvesting going on. And again, I don't know who is whom, but we have, I think, the two little girls, Maida and Frida. Maida is holding a dog, and you can see the barn in the background there. So they worked hard, they had success, but about 1910, Mr. Hansmann began to have heart trouble, and he felt that he needed to sell the farm. Here's another nice shot of a very early automobile. With
Ford.
Is it? Ford? Do you know what year?
Model A, the early Model A.
Early Model A. Anybody else?
1903.
Anybody else?
Wave didn't come out until the 30s.
Anybody else want to weigh in? An early car, a very early car, because Maida was born in 1899, so she was a little girl there.
So that had to be a 1903, I think you're right.
So they sold the farm, they moved to Green and rented a house on North Shenango Street. But, whoops, they didn't move yet, sorry. Maida attended the Smithville Union School while she was living on the farm. And we have a photo of the students there. She is right there, second row, fourth person. But there's some other familiar names on there. Gage Flanagan, Tarbell Flanagan, Dorothy Adams, who later became a teacher. There's Aurora Paw, Howard Rhodes, familiar names in Smithville.
And the teacher?
Oh, the teacher is Maggie Root.
And my mother taught there.
Did she?
Nita taught there.
Uh-huh.
Ada.
Uh-huh. I asked John about that, Mita, because I know he calls you Mita, And he said the other generations were Meta, using the German pronunciation. Yeah, and you're Meta.
My mother was Mita or Meta.
Okay, either one, anything goes. But you're Meta, is that right? Yeah. He left farming, he went to Green briefly, or the family did, and they saw an ad for a sawmill and gristmill in Smithville, and he was looking for an opportunity, a way to earn a living. And I think it was about 1912 that they actually bought the mill. But there's a wonderful real estate ad that you will not be able to read, but I picked off a few pieces of information from it if I can find it. The feed mill was built in 1893, and that is the same front of the building that's still there. There were 3 floors, water power, a turbine, and it lists all of the equipment that was for sale. And then across the creek was a sawmill and planing mill that was for sale. So he bought everything and bought a house in Smithville and moved here about 1912. Here's a picture of, on the left is the feed mill, or the rolling mill. On the right is the sawmill, which is across the Jenny.
My dad tore the sawmill down in early 1920s.
They did saw for a while, and then
Yeah,
it apparently for some reason didn't
but over there it was
Worked out.
always called the mill yard.
call the mill yard, even though the building was torn down about 1920s.
So the Jenny Gansler comes down between those 2 buildings.
Yes, the Jenny comes between the 2 buildings. Now, here's where we need Brian. These were described in the real estate ad, so we know they had equipment similar to this. And maybe you can tell us in layman's terms what these pieces of equipment did.
Yeah, the first one where it says roller mill, that was about 1890. It was invented, but before that it was what you typically would think of as 2 stones. Use my teeth voice.
Karaoke.
This is a roller mill, and the flour would come down through the top, and then go through these rollers, and then there was another set of rollers underneath, and then sometimes it'd have to go through a couple times. And this took the place of what before then, from the 1600s, was 2 stones, what you actually usually think of as grinding flour, where there'd be a bottom stone, the top stone's whipping around, and has the grooves. Well, that went up to about 1890, and then this took its place, because you could, in the stone mill, you could do, the difference of amount of flour is phenomenal. The stone mill, I don't remember, it's a matter of like 200 pounds compared to like 2,000 pounds. It was like, the difference was drastic of milling the amount of flour, plus all the different kinds of grinds you could get, where on the other stone you had to like, it wasn't very accurate, this was much more accurate. And then it all ran on belt drives, and then the flour would go through this, sometimes it'd go through a couple times, right? It would just
Well, the
walk.
grain, yeah, would come out of the bends down through, and then would go back up through and separate the middling from the hull.
Yeah.
The hull, the middling, and the flour. Yeah, I'll get into that.
And then the flour would go through these, which were silk. And you said there was 2 of them
Yes.
upstairs. And they'd go through one end of it, and the silk things tipped a little bit, so the flour would go on in, and the mesh would be different as it went through, and then it would separate the flour out from the outer parts. And then to get the flour on different levels, it would go up through little, these would be enclosed, but there would be these little buckets here that are on belts. And it was all like, that's how the flour got up, and then gravity sent it all back down and everything else. The only other 2 things besides this, and then it would go into packing machines, or it would get separated out to use for other kinds of flour. And John could tell more about the different kinds of flour than that. With the pictures that were before this of the mill, I brought a set of, I have the original blueprints of the mill that was built in 1893. And they had the blueprints drawn by a company in Iowa. And I kept a copy, I brought a couple copies, one for the Historical Society. I made of it, and that's on the back table. And on the back table, there's also a brass auger. And that's what would feed the flour onto any of these things.
Thank you. Thank you. You did a much better explanation than I could dream of. Here's a shot of the sawmill, which is across the creek, and in the background is what used to be called the Rawpaw House. And Joan and Howard Barker lived there. I think, did Gary Elliston, did you live there?
Yes.
Yes. I don't know where you are, but you're there somewhere. Yes, you did live there, didn't you? Yeah.
I might add one thing, that was always known as Shumway's Channel. Shumways lived up there, but as kids, that's all I just...
Yeah, Shumway's Channel. Mrs. Shumway was a Rawpaw daughter who lived up there. This is the home that the Hansmans bought in Smithville Flats. It's Tim Hanna's house today, for those of you who know where he lives. It's right across from John and Phyllis's house, or right across from where Oak Street hits Route 41.
Who's in the photo?
Well, I would say,
That's my mother and my aunt, I think, but I'm not sure. It's hard to tell.
yeah, I don't know who said that. Nita? Yeah, grandma sitting, so that was Mrs. Fred Hansmann
Okay,
seated.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. They were operating the mill. John said they had their ups and downs and their problems through the years, but all of a sudden, in the early 20s, there was a lot of competition with organizations such as the GLF, and they felt that they had to come up with something a little bit different than the average. So in their kitchen, in that house, they began working on a pancake mix. And it was going to be a self-rising pancake mix. It was going to be an instant breakfast where you had this bag of pancake mix, you added a cup of water, and you had instant pancakes. All you had to do was fry them. And they worked hard on it, and eventually they found the right proportions, and at a later date they patented it so that they were set to go. And some of you might remember that bag. I do. I remember it in the grocery store.
And on the table.
Yeah, and on the table back there, there's an exhibit. And I am going to turn this over to John now that we're at the mill and we're making the pancake mix. And we all will have questions. You're welcome to ask them as we go along, or if you want to wait till the end, we've saved quite a bit of time for questions. And I told John he can talk about anything he wants to, his memories of his grandfather or his father taking over, or what he did when he worked in the mill, or anything. So it's yours, John.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Karaoke.
First of all, I wanted to thank Sharon Davis and Chris and John Buck. They were a big part of this. And without Sharon's pushing me a little bit, I probably would never gotten done. I think it's great you do that. And I want to thank you very much. I'd like to ask just one thing. Would the descendants of F.H. Hansmann please stand for a minute? My sister Maida is here from Portland.
That's her on the picture.
Can you hear me?
There. Nope, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Right there. She's right there.
Oh, there she is.
I have that hat. In my senior chest, and I have those little shoes.
That's my Maida and my dad sitting down. Where Emmett Rutherford and Mug lived there on the corner. It was a two-family house, and at that point in time, they lived in one side of it, and then I was born, and they bought a house across the street, right? The thing that I lost my train of thought. Okay. Well, I'm going to start out. I guess I'll ask. Is there any questions on anything so far as what we've gone through, or what's been brought up? Yes.
On the school document, it looked like, almost like when, for the Hansmann name, it looked like they originally wrote like something, and the first three letters were like A-U-W-ish. It kind of looked like Auwarter. the first thing, and it looked like they scratched it out.
They came in a lot later. The Auwarters did, Jackson.
That's just what it looked like.
I do want to reemphasize my grandfather coming here. You know, he was a kid just 14 years old when he came over here, and he had to work, as Chris said, on the boat to pay for his passage. He had to work back and forth. And my mother used to talk about the times that he told Mother and the rest of the family that the captain wasn't a real nice guy, and he used to kick him around and slap him around a lot, and so it wasn't an easy thing. But they had one thing in mind: they wanted to come to America and make it a better place. And the other thing that wasn't brought up too much, but we haven't anybody in our family, is about my grandmother Hansmann. And without her, all of that never would have happened. In terms of the hotel, the farm, and also the business, the Hansmann's business. If it hadn't been for her, you know, she gave him a lot of support, but my grandmother's mother and father died at a very young age, so they left these kids. My grandmother Hansmann being the oldest, and then she had a sister and a brother. And so they, you know, F.H. Hansmann and my grandmother brought up her younger sister and her brother, John Morrison and Minnie Purdy. Probably many of you know Minnie Purdy. She lived here in town. So it wasn't an easy life for her at all, and she worked hard. But Chris has covered a lot of the items that I was going to talk about, and she did it very well. I think that, yeah, we're all the way down, okay. Okay, about my dad. My dad came to work after he married my mother, and they were married in Plainfield, New Jersey, right, Mita?
That's right.
And they lived in Fort Jervis, and he worked for the Mack Motor Company, and then he had the opportunity to come back up here in the early 1920s, and he went to work for my grandfather. And together, after the pancake mix was started out, Grandpa Hansmann came up with the idea, and after he got the formula, he would give the pancake flour to his friends and see what they thought about it. And they liked it, so then he sold it out of the back of his rumble seat of his car, and he went on from there. And he got into some of the major stores in the local area, and then he went over to Delaware County, and in Otsego County, Cortland County, and so on. And my dad expanded on that. So it was kind of a slow-growing situation. Meticulous man, and he had to do everything just right. So whatever he did in terms of the product, it had to be the very best, and he would only buy the very best. And the flour we got at that point in time came from the Russell Miller Milling Company up in Buffalo, and we buy what they call a special clear and a classic Bren, and then the milk that we got from Armour originally, and then we switched over to the Crawley Milk Company. We bought the soda from Church and Dwight up in, as I remember, in Syracuse, which is still there, I think. And the salt, I remember going when I was on the road, I'd go over to South Lansing, and we'd get the salt over there right from the main place. That was another unique story of, I had an opportunity to go into those, down into the salt mines, and if any of you ever have an opportunity to do that, you should do it, because over near Ithaca, there is these salt mines, and you go down like, I don't know how many stars, and I thought, boy, I'm going out of sight, but it was really something. The deep caverns, and that's where we got the salt, and then in the end we were getting the milk from up in Lafargeville, New York. But in terms of the business, I came there in the early, well, I was a kid, grew up in it, all of my brothers, and we did. And we had a lot of good people who worked there. And I couldn't go out of here without mentioning some of them that had an impact on my life, and one of them was Jim Hammerly. I'm sure you all know Jim, maybe some of you do. And then there was George Walker, and there was Ralph Livermore, and Carl Kenyon. I worked with Carl in the early days, and we had some good memories there. There was a lot of good training for a young guy. Ralph was the foreman down there, and you had to do what he said. And then my Aunt Frida ran the office, and she ran that with double entry bookkeeping, and she ran that with an iron thumb. Nobody questioned her. She had control of that office. But one day I have to tell you a funny story. I don't like snakes. I don't like snakes. Maybe somebody here likes snakes, but I don't. Well, anyway, there was a stone wall, which is still there, which was the abutment for the old bridge. And my brother Fred and I were there, and I said, geez, those snakes are coming out. I don't know. Fred says, yeah, he was always, so I said, we got to get rid of him. He says, I don't know, John. So there was a gas pump there. So I got a, Frida was a no-nonsense person, my aunt. She had no time for that. I filled that 5-gallon can of gas, and I doused that wall. Well, Fred says, I don't think you should be doing that, John. So I lit up a thing, and I took the paper, and I threw it on that wall, and I go boom! Man, the smoke was, you couldn't see. And who should drive right up in that smoke was Frida. Holy mackerel. What are you doing? You haven't got enough to do. We're going to find something for you to do. Well, anyway, at this point, the snakes are coming out. I mean, they were coming everywhere. So I said, well, she said, and then she saw the snakes, and she was an animal lover. I mean, she loved cats and dogs. So we did with the snakes. I said, got rid of them. But all of a sudden, Fred wasn't there anymore. But those are good stories. And another story is that...
John, you forgot Uncle Emil worked there too, Grandpa's brother.
Huh?
Uncle Emil worked there.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Vita brought out a good point. I missed that. I'm glad you did.
He worked there.
My uncle Emil Hansmann was a brother of Fred Hansmann, and there was 4 brothers, John, Emil, Andrew, and Fred. And they were all came over from Germany. It was a tough thing for my Uncle Andrew in 1917, 18. He joined the American Army and fought and killed Germans. He went back to his home country. And so it was a tough thing for him. But Emil was gone for a long period of time. I think it was over a love affair. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he became a cowboy. This story, I could go on and on. He was a cowboy, and he went out west, and he was gone for a long time. And all I remember, right, Nita, with those coyote skins he sent back. They were rugs. We had them all over the house. Well, he finally came back, anyway, and he moved in with Grandpa Hansmann and Grandma Hansmann and lived there. And there again, Grandma Hansmann, took care of washed his clothes and fed his food, did the whole 8 yards. So, but he was the man that did the formulation. He knew everything about the formula, and he was the one who did all the mixing. Nobody else touched that but Emil Hansmann, and that was right up until I got there. And it was I don't know, just an understanding that that's the way it was going to be as far as when Grandpa Hansmann was. Another quick story I got to tell you. Dad was emphatic about keeping things just so. And he used to say, John, and he talked to Rod and Fred and myself, that presentation is 90% of the sale. So, if you went into a store, you had to wear a white shirt and a tie, and your shoes were shined. It's awful hard to keep your shoes shined when you got dust on them. But anyway, Dad said, we're going to tar the roof. And that roof is high up there. And I said, okay. So anyway, we got this tar, and it came in huge chunks. It looked like glass chunks, and they had to heat it up. We got a 50-gallon drum and got a pulley and put it up on the roof. And I said to Dad, who's going up on the roof? He said, you are.
That roof right there, John?
Jim Hammerly and I, up there, way up there. Way up there. When you get up there, you look down the creek. It's a long way. You know, I said, I don't want to do that. He said, no problem, John. He said, well, tie a rope around your stomach and tie it to the chimney and you'll be fine. We did it. And I learned how to tie a rope with a mop. It wasn't.
John, are you going to tell them about Dad building the dam?
Yes. Did we have some pictures of the dam being worked on?
No. That was a project that he undertook.
Every year, there's two flumes, one on each side of the dam. One on this side and one on this side. The one for the flume on this, and I've got some pictures I'll show you. I brought with me of the turbine. You know that I made a copy so it'll be where the water turbine was downstairs. But we could drain all the water above the dam by opening both the flumes, one over on the mill side and the one on this side, and drain it down so we could work on the dam. That's a wood spar dam. And the problem was with the wood, you know, it would, after a while, anything that got to the air to it would rot. So a section of the dam, not every year, but periodically, we'd have to take a section of it up and repair it. So the crest of the dam is, say, up here, and the planks ran down, I think, 16, 18 feet. And we used to get the lumber down at Beers' lumber yard, and then he'd bring it up, and we had to dig it all out, and we'd replace those planks. But every year there was a project on that dam to keep it just so. And the building being painted in the summertime, it was a quiet time of year. Jumping around a lot because I had a lot of other things I was going to say.
Jan, there's whoops, wrong way. Right there.
Oh, here we go.
Isn't that who you were talking about?
This is Emil here.
Yep.
This is Fred Hansmann here in the office. That's good. I'm glad you... I don't know when that was. I don't know when that was
When
taken.
did your grandfather die?
Grandfather died in 1940.
1940, and your father took over when?
Dad took over, well, he was made a general manager in 1940 when Grandpa Hansmann died. But, he was the driving force on that. Dad was the one who, you know, I said to Phyllis, from the stable to the table, but I couldn't say stable, but when I say table, we used to put on a lot of pancake suppers. And Dad believed in that totally. And, you know, I didn't care much about mixing pancakes to the 1,500 people we'd feed at St. James or someplace down in Johnson City, but Dad was emphatic we do that, and he demanded that they have warm plates, hot pancakes, warm butter, and warm syrup, and always a Hansmann's napkin next to the plate. You know, he had to go out there and make sure that, but he, you know, we'd have, you know, pancake suppers on Saturday nights normally, usually Saturday nights, and then that was an ongoing thing that we did, and beside all the other pancake days. But I just wanted to say, Delaware County was the hotbed. I don't think people realize how much pancakes there was eaten over in Delaware County. And I know, I was over there. But we had, you know, we started in Sidney, Walton, Delhi, Margaretville, Deposit, Hancock, Franklin, Margaretville. Those people ate buckwheat and wheat pancakes. We had what we call a buckwheat and wheat. We had a plain pancake, and we had a self-rising, it was a blue label. And they ate buckwheat and wheat pancakes. They must eat them for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We had an A&P, this is a true story, in Walton, New York, and I used to go there every 4 weeks. And Charlie Stevens was the manager, and they would buy anywhere from 35 to 50 bales every trip. At 50-pound bales, 12 4-pounds or 5 10-pounds. And it was true for the whole area. I mean, it was, you leave Deposit and go up through Cannonsville, which is under 400 foot of water now, and, you know, on up into Walton. It was remarkable. We sold a lot of product, and we got a lot of distribution, and back then there was a lot of wholesale houses. Thai Grocery Company in Binghamton, and Empire Foods, Binghamton Wholesale Grocery, Jameson Boys. We had Oneonta Grocery, F.H. Cobb, which was Superfoods up IGA up in Cortland. And we sold those products to them, and they distributed to their stores in addition to the A&Ps and Acme's and Grand Unions and Loblaws and Victories and PNC's and so on. So we had a good distribution, and we were doing very well, especially right after the war. Things really picked up very well for us. To get back to the mill.
I just want to add something to what John just said. I belong to the Society for Preservation of Old Mills, and we just had a meeting this spring down in that whole area. He was talking about where we went around and visited the different water-powered mills. And every single mill, we explained who we are and how we relate to mills. And every single mill I went to, all the people there were asking, "Where's Hansman's? Why can't?" Evidently, they're all still pancake eaters down there. I mean, time after time. Where is it? Well, why can't you get it? Why aren't you bringing it back? So it's like has not gone away. And the quantities, when I just looked through records and the clipboards on the back, you can see the clipboards on that wall there. Those clipboards that are in the back are those clipboards that are hanging on the wall. And they end at 1939. So evidently, when FH passed away, they just took them off the wall, and put them in a box. And it turns out that's his filing system. That's his computer up there.
Well, I wasn't later when Frida got there.
No. That's why they're off the wall. Because you go through them, he put everything on those clipboards. He's just, it would look, you could tell. It's like the more important stuff was put in the very back of the clipboard, and then everything was stacked up. But you look at the quantities of flour they sold, that one clipboard has these receipts for the county home in Oxford, and every few weeks they were taking 1,000 pounds of pancake flour up there. You figure that's, 40, 20-pound bags? Or it's like, that's a huge amount of pancake flour. And so they're doing a lot of pancakes.
The end where Brian started to talk about is the mixing of the product, and I was talking about Ralph Littmore and Jim Hammerly and so on. We would get a siding, it would come in a rail car once a month, usually a full box car of raw flour, whatever we need for the ingredients to make it, and we ship it up from grain. The buckwheat grain, at that point in time when I first went to work, we got it out of the Finger Lakes area where buckwheat was grown, and they'd bring it in bulk. There was a guy by the name of Francis Calkins who had a milk route. Back then everybody had milk cans, and he would deliver milk during the day, and then he would come and put like plywood in the sides of his truck and put a smooth bottom in it, and he would walk and pick up the buckwheat grain and bring it back, and then we would bring it in, and we had a set of scales out in front of the mill. I think they're gone now. And they could weigh everything in, and then we'd pay whatever tonnage we had for the grain, and we'd run it down in the chutes and then bring it up in the elevators up in the bins. Speaking about buckwheat grain, it can become spontaneous combustion. And I can remember Dad going upstairs in the mill, in the bins upstairs. There was 4 big ones, and they were maybe 4 times higher than this room, and they were all tongue and groove siding in the bins upstairs. And he would put his arm in up to his shoulder, and if that grain even started to feel a little bit warm, he would have it move it, elevate it over into another bin. We always kept one bin fairly half empty, so we didn't have a problem with a fire. But we did all the grinding there at that point in time, and there was a guy by the name of John Livermore that lived here in town, and Palmer Walker, which was George Walker's father. When we finished working during the day, they would come in the evening and grind all night. And then in the morning, we'd pick right up, and we had a good head of water to be able to do that. That was usually in the spring, late fall, and the winter. In the summertime, we didn't do any grinding at all. The prices on the product, I can go back and I can remember every bale price, everything we had like a bale of 12 4-pounders was $6.25 a bale. The 10-pounders were $6.25. The 22.5 were $6.25, and we sold gram flour. We had an affiliation with Mercer Milling Company up in Baldwinsville, and also pastry flour we got from there, and cornmeal. So we had a full presence on the shelf, and it was Dad's thought. I was one of the ones that would have liked to seen that put in all the warehouses, A&P, Acme, Grand Union, Loblaws, and so on, so that we could get more distribution on the further out. But Dad always felt that the personal aspect was much more important than putting in the warehouse. So we did. We did that all store door delivery. We sold it off. We load the trucks in the morning, and we would start on a route wherever it may be, whether it was Watertown or Hancock, Deposit, Walden, and so on. And you go in and get the order from the store manager, and then you put the cut stuff on the cart and wheel it in and get it checked in, and then take the old merchandise off the shelves. It's like a bread salesman, I guess, and mark it and put it on the shelf. Now back then there was no markers. They're crayon, black crayon. Man, I wrote used up a lot of black crayon. It was, hypothetically, was 59, the 4-pound bag was 59 cents from 63 cents. But the big point was, our selling point was, they didn't have to do any work with Hansmann's at all. When we sold it to them, we brought it in, we put in no labor at all involved. All they had to do was sell it. And they could make they were making 20% margin, which is a lot of money in the food business. When they're selling cans of corn or something, there's not much in that. But on Hansman's, everything they sold was a 20% margin. And so it was important to Dad that we do that. And I know I'm jumping around, got out of talking about the mill, but
John, could
yeah.
you used to use the word face? You got a face on a shelf, was that the right word?
Facings.
Facing on the, what was that called when you had so many, you were allowed so much area to put
Yeah,
your
well, that was
painting?
never enough for Dad.
No. Didn't you kind of move things around, and then he did ends, did he do some ends too?
Oh yeah, we used to build a lot of displays, and
Yes.
the other thing Dad was big into was, I mentioned pancake suppers. I can remember going down to the Binghamton police station on I don't know where that would go, maybe off Hall Street. I think the governmental building's down there now. And we'd go down there on a Saturday night, colder in the day, the last place I wanted to be on a Saturday night. And we'd bake pancakes for those cops. And it was up on the 3rd floor. Those guys would come in off their beat, and boy, they could really eat pancakes. But Dad loved that, and we could double park any place in Triple City. He always had a method for something. And we did, we pull up, and in fact, they would direct traffic around the trucks. But we did that in-store as well. In-store on Friday, Mother would pick me up after school, and maybe down on A&P and Court Street. The stores were only open one night back then, on Friday night. And so after school, I'd go down, and Dad gave you a ritual. He said, hold the bag in your hand. Have you ever tried Hansman's? No. Would you like to try a sample? Yes. Well, here, and they have pancakes on a little plate, and a small Armour sausage and Vermont made syrup. I remember Vermont made syrup. But it was a good training for we as kids. It was 16, 15, 16 years old when I started that, and all of this, I look back on it now, I didn't think it was so much fun then, but it was a great experience, and Dad taught me a lot of values in terms of what responsibility is, and it carries through life. So.
And I remember there was only 2 rooms in that mill that were heated, the office and the packing room.
Right.
And the rest of there was no air conditioning and no heat in the rest of the
That's the coldest place in New York State to work. I'm telling you, over that creek, you stand in that packing room, and it would be one guy taking the merchandise out of the bagging machine. I think maybe you got pictures of that.
Yeah.
And then another guy tying it. Another guy would go onto a cart. Another guy would bale it. And that same guy that was baling it would take it out into the storage area. And that went on all day long. And you're standing there, and one fellow is mixing it. Go down into the it was a deep bin. I guess you would call, what do you call it? Where
The mixer? Ribbon mixer?
No, the mixer was upstairs.
Yeah.
The bin where we
Yeah, it was just a trap door. You just
And we just, that's where everything went into the mix, and it went up to the mixer upstairs, and it came back down to the packing machines. It was simple. It wasn't anything, but nothing got wasted. That's the thing I wanted to say. Nothing got wasted. The bale covers that we used for the bales where we took the merchandise in the store, you kept those, you fold them back up and tied a string around them, you brought them back, and we used them again, and again, and again. And it's the same thing with the bags, the 100-pound bags that the flour came in. That, they were there in piles, and Carl Skinner, who owned F&S, Fosgate and Skinner, he came up one day and he says, "Jack, what do you do with those?" "I'll sell them to you." Well, it worked out great because he had to have something to put coal in. You know, the people had these small stoves in their living rooms or wherever, peat coal, and so we sold him all the bags. And the buckwheat hulls, that's another story. We sold those to Lou Rappaport one time. They were supposed to be a great mulch, and I had that in some of my memories, but Dad, sweet talk, Lou Rappaport had a place down on Front Street. And he said, you know, these would make great mulch. You can sell these cheap and make a big profit. Well, people didn't know what buckwheat hulls were for mulch. We put them made a big pile in that parking lot, and then it started to rain. In those paper bags, and pretty soon my brother Rod and I went down. We used snow shovel to shovel it up and brought it home. But that was but there was a lot of other. Oh, chopping out the water wheel. You know, we got a picture of the water turbine. But down under the mill, where the water turbine, where the water came down the plume into the water turbine, which turned this way, clockwise, and then an end turn ran up to the main bull wheel. The bull wheel ran everything in the mill, and all the shafts and everything ran off that. And in the middle of winter, when it was 30 below zero, somebody had to go down and chop that out. And I must have been the dumbest one of the bunch. Or the youngest one, because I never got to say no. I told the story before, but when you chop that wheel out, when that thing broke loose, man, the water would hit the floor of that mill and come down on you, and you would stand there like a frozen icicle. It froze instantaneously. And I'd go back up in the office, and Dad says, "I'll stamp this side of the register," and it would just melt away.
There are some more slides if you'd like to look
Sure.
through some of those and maybe.
Yeah, I'll get carried away on these others. But yeah.
Well, it might reinforce some of the things you're
At
saying.
the 35 flood, Grandpa Hansmann lost everything in that flood, anything that was on the main floor. You can see where the water was up at the bottom of the window, in the office, where the office was. It was up actually higher than that because but that's Ingram's house, or over there where Barnes's were. That was the 35. But Dad used to say, Dad would say, somebody would say, "Aren't you worried about the flood?" And Dad said, "This mill's not going anyplace. With that buckwheat we got up there, we had those beds full, you know? So much weight on that thing, you're not going to move it." And it never did. It never did. I mean, we went through a lot of different high waters, but that, you know, there was so much weight in the mill. That's where Phyllis and I live today. That doesn't look like it now, I hope. But my grandfather, this is my mother and my grandmother getting into that 39 LaSalle my grandfather had. That's my mother, and that's my grandmother and grandfather. About 1938, Mita?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh. Oh, there's a good picture. You know, I could probably name all those kids. That's George Hoffman and Clifford Lake and Dickie Denny and Lillian Harding, and there's Sally Gates. She married Ed Thompson. Dorothy Adams is on the hill, and Donnie Sherwood in the back there. Dickie Denny.
Now, which one's you, Jen?
Right here.
Making a face.
Taking a face. Earl Rothford, Catherine Ellis, yeah.
That looks just like Scott.
Yeah.
Jack, can you back up to the one?
I think I skipped over one.
You did skip over one.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, you know, this is a good picture of, on each end of the town coming into Smithville, Grandpa Hansmann had signs made. And as you, up there where Ron Shapley lives, you know where Ronnie Shapley lives coming in? The old road used to run there. You can see the sub-base for the old road used to come around. If you look at it close, it's the other side of Flanagan's going out of town. And he had one built up by Atwell's, which had a sawmill up on the north end of town, and he had this one put here. And I thought it was really unique. It was a real good advertising thing, you know.
You must have always had hunting dogs, right?
Pardon me?
Hunting dogs, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, that was Laddie, yeah. Remember Laddie, Mita?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do.
37 Ford.
He
37?
he would pick me, I would be down there, I used to go down to my grandfather's a lot. And he was really good to me, and one time, whenever I go down there, he says, "You want to go with me to Green?" And yeah, I'll go. So he would, I would write down in the car, and he was a great friend of Mr. Gray Sr., which would be Charles Gray Sr. He had a little white goatee, and he had an insurance office right next to where the bank is now. It's a parking lot, but then next to that was Brown's Ice Cream Store. And there was a telegraph office in the front. Russell Gray used to run the telegraph in, and Mr. Gray Sr. Had an office in the back, and they were really close friends, my grandfather and Mr. Gray. And he used to go in there and talk, and he would say, here's a nickel, go over and get an ice cream cone. Oh man, that was great. But I'd come back, and I remember having to sit in the straight back chair there, and Russell Gray ran the telegraph office. He was always typing on it. That was in that truck that I used to go. It's a nice picture. That's my grandfather Hansmann, that's my dad, and that's my brother Fred, which is Brian's father, Polly and Patty, and all the That's a nice picture. That's how the mill used to look. That's me in 1950.
Yeah, I skipped one. Wait a minute, John. There we go.
Huh? That's Ralph Livermore. He used to love to shake pennies. I don't know why. He used to like, on break time, we were going to shake pennies, and he'd have a whole pocket full of pennies, and he'd bring your pennies, John. So you put all the pennies you could carry in a coffee can, you shake them up, and whoever ended up with the most heads got all the pennies. I said, well, why don't we do this with dimes? He's a good guy. You know, when he went, Ralph was, you know, they were great guys to work with. As a young kid, he always had a roll of bills, I mean, big enough to choke a horse. I remember one time, he said, I got to go buy a new car. I said, what? He says, right here. I mean, they weren't dollar bills either, you know. Ralph was a good guy.
Now, when you go back to Ralph, I grew up with Ralph in the mill down there. He was still working down there. And he would make my sister's doll furniture down there. And he would constantly be giving us toys or something like that all the time. And he kind of like babysat me somewhat in the mill because there was so much going on. He kind of kept me out of trouble and kept me from getting into things I shouldn't have. He'd find me in places where I shouldn't have.
That's me, and I don't know, that has to be in 1950, says that. Hey, Michael. Where's Mike? Come here. This is my grandson, Michael Pryor. About that time, Dad said we ought to have a bowling team. Don Pratt, who won the bowling alley, was a good friend, a really good friend of mine, and yeah, well, you ought to get a team. So we got a team together, and we went to my Aunt Frida, and we need shirts. We're not going to pay anything for any shirts. My dad says, okay, I'll buy the shirts, but Dad loved purple. I don't know why he loved purple. Turn around. Like, and anyway, we were down the home this evening before we came up here, and Phyllis, or one of the girls, said something, well, you ought to get one of that shirt, and fits you great. Wouldn't fit me anymore.
But that
then though, wouldn't it, in that picture?
Yeah.
In that picture, yeah.
Hey, John, you gonna buy us some shirts?
You say so? That would be a really nice thing, have an Auwarter logo. Thanks, Mike. That's another nice picture. That was, I think, is the name changed on there then?
Yes, that says Hansman's Mills. So that was 50 or so.
You look up on that roof where it's hard. I keep thinking about that. But anyway, up Shumway's Channel, Dad wouldn't let anybody on that ice. Nobody could get on that ice until he checked it. And it had to be so many inches thick before you go on there. So when I got the right thickness, we'd go up there. And honest to God, on Sunday afternoon, you would see sometimes 40, 50 people. I remember Lynn Huddle said, boy, he could have really iced it. I couldn't believe it. He was iced, boy, but there was all kinds of different people down there on a Sunday afternoon, and they get somebody would bring, probably Lynn Huddleston would bring the tires and put them on and get them burning and have a place to keep warm, and we'd ice skate. We used to have hockey games up there, and one time, there was a guy named Ray Warner, and you all know Horsey Thomas, and Cliff, Billy Gray. His father was a barber. Billy wasn't a very big guy. He was a little short guy. And so Ray Warner came down with his car. He had an old 37 Chevy. And that island that's in the center, you go up Shumway's Channel, come down Garden Brook, what we call Garden Brook on the other side. And you can make the circle. Well, they had big long ropes on the end of the back of the car. So anyway, Ray got a little close to the dam. Well, here Billy held right on it, Horsey did, and they're out there in those ropes, right on over the dam and right back on the dam. I mean, that's the truth. I saw that. But we had a lot of fun down there. You know, in the summertime, there'd always be a ton of kids down there swimming and ice skating in the winter, and this is the wall where the snakes were.
That's subsequent to the flood of 35, John?
Pardon me?
Is that where the bridge was?
Yeah, the bridge was there in 35. They only, then the original bridge, no, this bridge here, no, that wasn't there in 30. The bridge the pre-existing bridge that's there now was there, I think.
We're on the third bridge?
We're on the third bridge, right, I'm sorry. Third bridge is there now.
Right.
What was located in the part that juts out on the right-hand side?
Pardon me?
Juts out toward the dam, inside the building on the second floor. What was that?
Okay, this was a packing room right here. This was the office. Is that what you want to know?
Yes.
The office?
Yeah.
Upstairs, this is where the bends were, up here and here. And the water turbine was right in here. Right there, where it came out of the flume. And that's something I forgot to tell you. Before there was electricity in Smithville, Grandpa Hansmann had electricity. And he had electricity here. We had dynamos downstairs in the mill, and make electric power. So he offered the village of Smithville, he would give them electricity, from the dam. They elected not to, because I think at that point they were about ready to run electric through here at that time. So they didn't do it. So anyway, in the meantime, he put a Lynn engine downstairs, a gas engine, that when we didn't have water power, the gas engine would run everything, run the main bull wheel and so on. You want to start that Lynn engine, that was a whole other story. I mean, you had to crank it. And I remember your dad talking about that. And it would kick so bad sometimes to throw him across the cellar floor, You get cranking on that, and all of a sudden the back door, boom, But that's how we ran the mill for a long time, with that gas engine when we didn't have water power. And then Dad switched it all over, and we put electric motors and everything else to do away with the engine.
John, I used to ride to work periodically with your brother Fred, and my recollection is that he told me that water turbine was generating something like 25 horsepower.
35 taxable.
Was it Was it that?
35 taxable
And then I
horsepower.
don't know, it was Emil or Fred finally electrified the bridge, did he not? Do you remember that?
No.
Okay.
All I remember, Howard, is when Dad told me to go down and break up those concrete piers for the thing set on. And so, what did I know? I took a sledgehammer and you hit one, you hit a piece of, it's like a baseball bat. It's a sledgehammer and bang. So Dad knew that was going to happen. So I was down there maybe an hour and, come on, back up here. Everybody out of the mill. Dad was always mucking around with dynamite. He always had. So he mud packed those concrete piers, those dynamos set on, Everybody out. Well, everybody out. And man, when he touched that, he'd had a car battery. Touched that thing off, and the old floor was lifted up in that mill, and got all the dust out of the cracks downstairs, and they were just in chunks. Okay, John, get them out of here. All these memories come back, all these years later.
Is that a little giant turbine?
The water turbine's down. You go down in front of the mill now, and it's there. That water, they took it out, the guy that took the mill apart, and thank God they saved it. It sits down in front of the... In fact, Sharon went down and took a picture of it. And you could drive down around with the mill, and it sits right out in front there.
Yeah,
Tim Raymond's done a nice job with that. He's cleaning it up around there a lot, but he's got that turbine out. That's the one I chopped out, or used to chop out.
that must weigh at least a ton.
Oh, that thing is heavy. Heavy. It was a lot. I was talking to Tim Raymond, and the other day I ran into him. Phyllis and I rode down around there, and I telling Brian's going to follow up on it, but there's still some equipment left upstairs in the mill. I didn't realize that. I thought it was all out of there. But that would be interesting because there's the shaker that shook out all the kernels of stones or any debris that was in there when you get ready to grind it. We used to go to Muncie, Pennsylvania every 2 years when I go with Dad, and we had to grind have the roller mills ground down to sharpen, so when they came through.
Then they put more grooves in them.
Pardon me?
Then they put more grooves in them.
Yes, regroup. And so all these things, you were exposed to all that, Well, I got carried away. I don't want to.
Let's keep going. Well, we're up to 1970.
Yeah, there was I left the business in 1959, and Fred and Rod and my mother died. When my mother died, half the estate came to we kids, and I had another job, and I was managing the Northeast for another company. But the business, Fred, before that, because of the situation down the mill getting old and have to meet all the standards that the state demands, they had to move. And so Fred Melly built the building down where GC Controls are now, and did a great job on that. So they moved the whole facility up there. And then when Mother died, they finally decided I was gone there, and then they finally decided to sell it with a guy named Alda Clue, who was a lawyer over in Bainbridge, and he bought the business, and then he sold it to a fellow named Burr Kraft. Burr and when I left Hansmann, I went to work for the Beechnut Company in Canajoharie, and Burr, we had a plant in Holland, Michigan, and we had a plant in Rochester, New York, and we had a plant in Canajoharie. And Burr managed the coffee plant in Holland, Michigan, and then he came to Rochester. We had a coffee plant there. It was Beechnut Coffee at that time. So I ran into Burr at a couple of football games and got to know him, and he was saying then he was really interested. At that time, Burr had got promoted, and he was running the Landers Company down on the corner of Shenango and Henry. There's a big building now, there's a restaurant in there now. And Burr is a fine guy, and his first wife, she was a dynamo, and they were really interested in getting into the business. So anyway, to make a long story short, they bought the business, and Then, I would see them occasionally, but I was out of it after that. Anyway, if anybody has any questions, I think I went on too long about personal things here, but... Oh, this is great. See, that's safe. That held all secrets. Everything was in that safe. Brian, I'm very proud of him. He has just been made vice president. They have chapters of mill restoration in the United States. And they have a Northeast chapter, and Brian has just been made vice president of that chapter. He became good friends who owns New Hope Mills. And New Hope is the fellow who has his safe now. And so Brian and he became good friends, and Brian went up and took a tour of the facility they have in Auburn. New Hope Mills also has an old mill on Route 41A outside of Skinny Atlas. And again, Brian and...
That's their original mill.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Brian and he became good friends, and that's where Brian's really getting involved. And maybe Brian can add more to it, but that safe held... There was a safe within a safe.
Well, it turns out when I went up there, they said, this is a really rare safe. They contacted Yale, the Yale Safe Company, and even that guy goes, that's one of the rarest safes, because this safe has, which is John Love with FH, this safe is this is a really heavy, secure safe, much heavier and thicker than usual, and then it has a whole complete another safe
inside
the safe.
I know that.
So that anytime this door is open, it's still like a locked safe.
There was only...
They said that's really rare. We sold very few of those.
Only two people had the combination. That was your dad and Frida. Nobody else. I mean it.
I never saw the inside of the small safe. And it was never...
Oh, everything in that small safe. Everything was there, boy. All the secrets. One person I didn't mention was the Churchmith. Herb Churchmith Sr. and Herb Churchmith Jr. And Herb Churchmith Jr. was a great guy. And my dad treated him like a son. He thought him as a son. I mean, Herb married Elsie Bottle, and they had the farm where Corey and Corey's mother and father owned, the Wolfords. But anyway, Herb came to Dad one day and he says, Jack, he says, I think I'm going to take up farming. And he said, I want to work nights at the Green Brass Aluminum, and I'm going to farm it during the day. Dad said, boy, I don't know, Herb, whether you can... But anyway, finally, a year or so went on later, and Herb came back to Dad. He said, I'm not a farmer. I'm going back to school and get my degree. And he ended up, he went to, became a professor at Broome University and taught German all those years. So Herb Churchmith was a class guy, but Dad thought the world of him. I remember one time, you remember, Mita, when we got that little store on Court Street in Binghamton at Christmas time? And Herb Churchmith and Dad were there. They rented a store downtown Binghamton, which was a busy area in the late 40s. And, the streets were mobbed with people. And Dad and Mother came up with a bright idea that they would rent this store and give free pancakes and sausage and syrup to everybody. But they had a great idea. Well, Herb went down there and worked with Dad on that, and young Herb. And that was a big success. We got a lot of notoriety out of that. So.
John, I just wanted to our pancake flour for the pancakes was made with water, and so many people thought it would be better, I guess, to put milk in it.
Yeah, ruin
and
it.
One time my father chose very carefully, I think, the people that he did the pancake suppers for. I mean, he did them for the policeman in Cortland. He seemed to gravitate towards those people. But it was a big church in Binghamton, big Catholic church, and Dad didn't get down there as early as he thought.
Yeah, I
and
know
I guess
that.
the people decided that they would mix up all the pancake flour and they put milk in. They thought it would be better. My father went down and it looked different. The batter looked so much different. And he said, well, we used milk instead of water because we thought it would make it richer and better. And my father said, well, you could just throw that out and take it to the Salvation Army or take it to someplace because I'm not using it. And they mixed up a whole new, to use them like big milk cans, I think they I can't remember what they poured it into, but I remember the other thing is he'd have a slab of, would be bacon, about this big, and they cut it, and he'd use it, and he had,
Yeah, use that on the griddle.
and he used that on.
Yeah, salt pork. If you use salt pork, anybody who bakes pancakes in a big way on a griddle, you get a piece slab of salt pork and
That's
cut
salt
a
pork.
couple of handles on it. And you can use that to grease the griddle, and boy, it really works out good and makes good pancakes. I have to tell one last story, and I'm gonna leave. Dad used to take the trucks down every Saturday morning to J. Doodle. It was 4 days of seeing Greed. And it seemed like many different times, and you've all heard about Pussyfoot Johnson. Well, Pussyfoot Johnson had a farm up there where the Sullivans lived. It's a beautiful place on the way to Victona. And I remember Mrs. Johnson always drove the car, and I said to Dad, "Who's that?" Because he had a patch over one eye. And Dad said, "Well, that's Pussyfoot Johnson." I don't know. But what I remember more than anything else, that she would pull in on the hoist, and he would sit in the car, and I sat there with my mouth open, and up he'd go, and he never got out. He sat in the car while they had it greased. That was a little funny story. Yeah, no Pussyfoot Johnson.
You should tell him
Well-
why it's called Pussyfoot.
Does anybody else have any questions at all?
Why was his name Pussyfoot? Why was his name Pussyfoot?
Beats the heck out of me. Anybody know? He was a great prohibitionist, and he hated booze, you know. And the story goes that there was a still not too far from his place, and it was going to get raided. So where did they take it? Got up to Pussyfoot's. They never did catch the guy, I guess.
Well, he called him Pussyfoot because he wandered, he was so quiet, and he come raiding these places. It's like he's buried not too far from my grandfather. It's great. Isn't he, John? Is he not? You can see it says Pussyfoot on his tombstone, which is right near my grandfather.
I never heard.
I think he lost the eye during one of his raids, didn't he? Didn't he lose the one eye during one of his raids?
Something. Maybe. I don't know. But
No.
Maybe we need a program.
does anybody have any questions about the grinding, the mixing, the gram flour? As I said, we got with yes,
Who
sure.
has the flour secret mixture now? Who has that
Pardon me?
recipe? Who has the recipe for the flour mixture?
I would imagine the people who own it.
Yeah, but they're not making it, right? I mean, it's not.
Well, what happened when after the business was sold, it was moved to Binghamton. And George and Robin bought it, and they have a plant down there on Court Street, near Dick's on Court Street, and that was hit in the flood, and they had like 6 feet of water in the building, and that pretty much wiped them out. So
They still have the secret recipe then?
I would imagine.
I can answer that for you. That picture when I was up at New Hope, it turns out that I belong to that old mill society, and last year I went to one of the meetings, and we had to go around the table and introduce ourselves, and the person on the other side of the table was the owner of New Hope Flour. And And John will remember New Hope was like our big competitor. He's still grumbling about it to this day. So I go there and he introduced we introduced myself, and I didn't know they were New Hope. It was the owner, Dale Weed. His father owned New Hope. Their family all knew, so they're still in their family. Dale's the same age as I am. He's got a son about the same age as me. And Dale's father was all in the business, running the business when John and my father and everything. And they were like lock horns competitors. I mean, we never ate New Hope. It was like you go in and they would steal a row of our flour, and then we put back and we'd steal 2 rows of theirs, you know, and it'd be like that. Although we all hated Aunt Jemima. So we'd all steal from Aunt Jemima. But anyways, I go to the meeting, and Dale introduces, and first thing he said is, before he even said who he was, he goes, "Yeah, I have Hansman's safe." I mean, he goes, and I go like, and then he introduced himself as New Hope. And so we became good friends. And it turns out he grew up exactly like I did. Their water power mill is abandoned now. Well, it's not being used now. They moved to a new plant. Same reasons Hansman's moved to a new plant. So their business kind of continued the same. Now they're still in business, And the answer to your question about the flour is when Hansman's closed in Binghamton, Dale went down and bought a bunch of their equipment and has the recipe to the flour, which I have to tell you is not the exact same recipe that Hansman invented. It got slowly out. It was when it left Hansman's here, but it slowly got it cost-wise changed to a little. Everything was tweaked a little bit, so it's not, you're not eating the same thing. But now New Hope Mills, and if you ever go to Auburn, they have a great company, and you can go in and see the little tribute to Hansmann in the corner of their store, and they are mixing and packaging for other people. And Buck Hill Farms, which is in Schoharie County, or in the Catskills, the Schoharie area, they're a maple syrup producer there, and they're packaging it under their label. It's called Buck Hill Farms flour, and I think even on one of their bags they talk about Hansman's, that it is the Hansman's formula. And of course they're right in that same area John says. They love to eat pancakes down in that area. So evidently it's still selling down in that area, only in a different thing. So when I told everybody, I go, well, it's not the same, but you can get Hansman's flour from the Buck Hill. And they do mail order. So if you want to have still some Hansman's Mills flour, you can get it from them at this
They're
particular
online.
point.
You can buy it online. The internet.
Well, we thank you, John, and thank you, Brian. It's been a wonderful